All right, well, welcome to this incredibly gender diverse group. I'm Alex Conrad. All the smarter female reporters, I guess, were on assignment. This is Jason Spinell, who took over earlier this year of Slack's new fund.
Every time you say Slack fund, that happens.
Slack's fund creates tremors in the force among startups, so there you go. Then we have Daniel Chait, who is CEO of Greenhouse, awesome startup in HR. Then we have Michael Pryor, whose company Trello is kind of like crazy digital cloud whiteboards, among many other things. And then we have Omar Qari with Abacus, more in the sort of financial software space. So we kind of cover different areas of enterprise software, and we are good at making mic noise. But yeah, so we've got a pretty diverse crowd here. I think that everyone is East Coast, though, at least predominantly, right? For the time being. So that's cool. And I thought we would start by talking about how much you guys are frenemies, if at all, being enterprise leaders, building software in adjacent but kind of different spaces right now. Do you watch what each other is doing? Do you collaborate? What's it like kind of in this ecosystem today? And whoever wants to jump, Michael.
Our products don't really overlap. I mean, the closest probably maybe is Slack a little bit, but I like to tell people, like, if you're doing search and rescue out in the woods, Slack's your radio and Trello's your GPS, so they like kind of work really well together. I think we're like the top integration in Slack, so there's not a lot of overlap on the product side. I think I don't know if we're frenemies. We're probably just friends. We're all friends.
Okay, you're all friends?
As far as I know.
Okay, but you guys probably compete for talent, right?
Things just got real. I can talk to that a little bit. So we're a customer and a vendor, I think, to all three of these guys. So yeah, I mean, there's from a product standpoint, I think Michael hit the nose on the head. I think one thing that I found very interesting about that question in particular. How are we doing? Maybe we can shut one of these off. Hello? There we go. About the question about competing for talent is, as we've taken, so Greenhouse is a recruiting software, so companies use Greenhouse to run and manage and optimize their recruiting process from kind of the moment you start prospecting people and then the interviewing and hiring process. And so our customers kind of interestingly take our position is that we help you and we're part of your system for hiring. And they actually take that really seriously. So one thing that we've seen is we have to be quite delicate about who we recruit from, because we've had cases where we've interviewed someone and we've given them an offer, and then we get a call, like our account manager gets a call and it's like, what the hell are you doing? You're poaching our people and you're running our recruiting engine, and like, are you somehow like spying on our interviews and like what's going on? It's like, well, no, first of all, of course, your employees aren't in Greenhouse like your candidates are. Your employees are in LinkedIn, where anyone can see them. And of course, more basically, like we would never step in front and like try to like use our customers' data in front of us. But nonetheless, like the fact that we're seen as an HR piece of their kind of HR arsenal, it does impose on us like a little bit higher of a bar for how we interact with the broader talent market. And I think that's probably also due to the fact that we're a startup, we're part of the kind of New York community, and a lot of the companies that are here that have the talent that we need are people that many of us know personally, have worked with, and kind of like interact with on a daily basis. So that is an interesting aspect of what at least I've tackled. I don't know if you guys have seen the same.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. At least in our space in particular, we end up running into a lot of kind of frenemies, as you're describing, because a lot of our partners also happen to have similar services as we do. And so, for example, Abacus, we're killing the expense report, and if we partner with NetSuite and Xero, these guys also happen to have a part of their products that do expense reporting or expense management. The reason that their sales reps are still referring customers to Abacus is because like Abacus tends to be really specialized in just that, and they kind of recognize that we can get the larger sale if we're willing to kind of admit that on this side, maybe this specialized solution is better. And I think that this trend, now that if we want to call this kind of this shift to ERP 2.0, like as we're kind of going down that, I feel like that's only going to increase. Just as more and more services are interconnected, everybody's going to have like a little specialized piece, but it's just going to be kind of recognizing where your strengths are and weaknesses are.
That has to get more complicated when the specialist starts investing in other startups, right? So what's kind of the mandate with Slack Fund? How does that work that Slack is building a community without stepping on toes?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're transparently trying to figure that out, right? It's a really fine balance on one hand to say, hey, we have this open platform, we're going to be really transparent with the developer community, so come everybody and build on top of us. And on the other hand, say, hey, we have this fund, and by nature of having a fund, we're essentially sort of picking and choosing winners, essentially. I think our viewpoint on that is we're going to make a ton of investments. We're not going to make enough investments to blanket the whole ecosystem, but we're going to make enough to sort of spread the love around in a lot of ways. Another way we're thinking about sort of mitigating the signaling risk is we're sort of mandated not to lead rounds, so we're always minority investors in the round. So we're not taking a board seat, we're not setting terms, and there's very little favoritism to the companies that we do actually invest in. So no funny business in the App Store and in terms of rankings. The platform roadmap that we have is public to everybody, and so it is on Trello and searchable. So I think it's early for us. We just started this fund in December of last year. So we're playing it out. We've made 15 investments, and so far the commentary has been nothing but positive.
So one thing that I find fascinating is I'm sure a lot of people here are either working with or starting early stage companies where you're so focused on building your own business, you don't really have to worry about competition too much or what the big players are doing too much. You do a good job, good things will happen, right? Then at some point, Mark Benioff comes and buys your company, and you're no longer a small specialist. You're suddenly potentially across all of Salesforce's customers. You're maybe involved in all sorts of other businesses. I'm talking about Quip, obviously, getting acquired, Brett Taylor's company. I'm curious, when a startup like that hits the scale that it gets bought by one of these big players, does that kind of change that sort of feel-good teamwork mentality? And similarly, what does it mean for your businesses to see that kind of acquisition happen?
I know Michael's excited to talk about Quip, so.
I mean, the price of that acquisition is probably good for us. And I think that space, although I think, Quip is I tend to think of them more as like a better Google Docs or something like that. Whereas Trello is kind of like a hub for those docs to live in as you're planning whatever you're doing. But how does that change our relationship? I guess we're working with, we're partnering with Salesforce now if we do that. So I don't know. I think the one interesting thing happening there in that space is like you have, there's like Microsoft, Slack, Salesforce, Google, Atlassian. Like there's this big push forward for these companies to try to own the sort of productivity of the whole company. And I think it's actually a really cool space to be in because of all of that stuff going on. That there's so many different players like trying to carve out their niche or actually own the entire market, and they're all going at it at different ways.
I do think we could also look at Uber, and Uber is now very indirectly invested in Lyft through the DiDi deal. If you map it, and these alliances get very complicated as companies get bigger, and so I'm curious, is that something that you guys even think about? Oh, this is not a competitor today, but might be in the future, or if they were to be bought, their technology could be reused in a way that suddenly is a threat to us.
Cool. So we've definitely seen in our space and kind of recruiting tech LinkedIn has bought a number of companies. They bought Connectifier. They bought a referrals platform, kind of rolled it out as like LinkedIn referrals, a few other things. And in some ways it makes it better for us as a partner because now they're part of this like larger kind of partnership infrastructure where they actually have like partnership people and they have tracking and you can do spiffs and like you can kind of like work as a more productive partner together. We haven't yet had the experience of one of these big software behemoths buying a direct competitor of ours and saying, how does that impact the direct competitor? But just using my imagination for a second, like we already have hundreds of competitors. Some of them, I mean, Oracle has the leading market share in our industry with like 40% market share. It hasn't really ruined my day yet, so we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add to that, for us, we're in an interesting position because I don't know if that's a good or bad deal, really. I know Brett. I'm a little bit jealous of him at this point. But for us, I think it puts like a finer point on the fact that, hey, like this is a massive industry. People are paying attention to it. For Slack, obviously, from a platform perspective, going back to that first question, we don't see anybody as enemies, right? Like we're happy that everybody is sort of integrating with Slack and being that connector of things. And so Salesforce buying Quip, we had a great relationship with Quip. We still do. Now I guess we have a relationship with Salesforce on a deeper level. But I think it's good for the ecosystem.
So another way to think about that, and one thing that I think about a lot with early stage companies is who are you actually selling to, and how much of their time are you taking relative to what would be ideal? So are you a daily product? Are you a weekly product? Are you a monthly product? And how much of an organization should be using you for you to be happy? So I'm curious how you guys have kind of taken those questions with your own organizations.
I guess I'll start it off. For us, candidly, we want people using Slack all the time, right? So I think the public numbers right now are something like a daily active user is spending something like 2 hours a day in Slack, active, 10 plus hours a week. And I think that goes to the point of having all these integrations, having the App Store, and being this hub for work. And so obviously we've had this immense groundswell from bottom-up developer adoption. At some point, and this is happening now, we've noticed that to crest the hump in larger sort of legacy organizations, there has to be more hand-holding. And I don't know what the right number of people in an organization is, but hopefully that keeps rising.
That's a great question, Alex, because for us at Greenhouse, that was a huge aspect of how we designed not only our product, but like our entire go-to-market strategy, our pricing model, like how we actually position the company. We like to say that hiring is a team sport where half the team doesn't know how to play. And so historically, the recruiting software kind of ignored everyone that wasn't in the recruiting department. It's like recruiting software is for recruiters. If you think about the things that happen in hiring, it's like, sure, the recruiters kind of manage and sort of kick off the process. But ultimately, you've got people all throughout the business that are giving referrals and referring their friends, that are conducting interviews, and in those interviews, not only assessing the candidates and kind of like judging who's good and who's bad for the position, but also selling the company to that candidate. And like the best talent has lots of opportunities. You want to make sure that they know the reasons why they should take your job. Hiring managers have a huge amount of input and influence over the role. And should participate fully as partners to HR. Executives need a view. And usually like recruiting software wasn't viewed that way. So we absolutely pay attention and try to engineer the experiences for like, what's the biggest problem if you're an interviewer? It's like, well, actually that moment we have to walk into an interview room and sit across from a stranger and spend an hour with them is kind of terrifying. And then you have to go back to your desk and write an essay to HR about that person's future. Like, it's horrible.
I do that every day.
Yeah.
Only my essay is to angry internet commenters.
There you go. But you get paid for that is the difference, right? So yeah, I think absolutely from our standpoint, like we've really tried to think about like how does this change or like workflow disseminate throughout the organization, and who are all the different kinds of people that have very different needs?
So ours is actually, it's almost entirely the opposite, where when we get into our all hands discussion, then the big stat that we put up on the board is, oh, we actually drove down time in app by like 40% based on that new feature that was launched. And I think, increasingly, especially as, we're now using 13, 14, 15 different solutions, the goal is not to use the actual tool, the goal is to get the work done. And so from our perspective, we're really trying to take the entire expense creation and even the review and approval process and just automate it. So how can we, match receipts to transactions automatically? How can we predict what the category is going to be? How can we suggest to a manager that this expense, you've approved this greenhouse expense every single month for the last 4 months, just automatically approve it next month. And so, so that's really the kind of stats and focus that we have.
I think that's a really interesting comment, because I think if you build your software, if your monetization is through advertising, right? Like if you're a journalist or Facebook or something like that, you really care about page views and time in app and all those things. But like a lot of the software that we're building is enabling people to do some other thing. Like if you go to Slack's page right now, it's like we put robots on Mars, right? Like it's all about the end goal. Like what is the how do you, like if Trello is your blueprint for building the house, the blueprint is just there to build the house. Like that's really what you want to do. And so if you get, like obviously we want people to find the app useful, but if you get too focused on, DAU, MAU, you could drive the wrong behavior, which is like, I just spend all day in Slack and I didn't do anything, so, for us, getting back to the other question of like, what's the use case? I mean, we have a very horizontal, our market is super horizontal. Like we want the case to be, if we see a company where when they add an employee, the number of people using Trello goes up by 1, then that's a win for us. Like they're using it across the whole organization, and that's an ideal situation for us, that it's a tool that the whole company relies on. But
so I'm sure at least someone in this room, if not a few of you, have had a situation where you felt like you were working on something that just made people work better, but it wasn't always clear to exactly point to all the ways that they were working better. I do think of Slack as a media example, where I think Vice said they were going to take a break from Slack because they were so addicted that they had to kind of go back and rethink how they were using it to make sure it was incisive and productive and not just gossiping all day and not writing any stories. And I'm sure there are business contexts for everyone. So this reminds me of another, I'm not going to name the startup, but a startup I know reached out to me and said recently, hey, Alex, we know that our customers make a lot of money using our system, but we have a hard time mapping for them why adding more seats continually makes them more money. So what are we going to do to avoid an issue of them just using a minimal account and trying to get most of that value forever and not kind of growing into an increasingly important customer? And I said, well, gosh, I get way underpaid to answer that question, but here are a couple of people to talk to. I'm curious, you guys are some of the best people to talk to for that question. What would be the way you've approached it, or how would you?
Yeah, it's funny. So I know this is probably much more common with like Capital IQ and like things like that, where it's like you have all these folks kind of gathered around one login to access it because it's so expensive. But even with Abacus, you have this concept of, we're going to have one corporate card and everybody in the organization is going to share that corporate card. And then on top of that, we'll just like use this one login, and then we'll like classify everything there and everybody will just share it. And I think, frankly, if that workflow is the optimal workflow, then in many ways, like they should be able to do that. But it's up to us to really make sure that the value that we're able to offer to these customers is based on individuals actually having their own accounts. And so with Abacus in particular, it's like, how can we demonstrate the customer acquisition cost for this sales team by you tracking expenses with each of the sales folks on that team being able to tie it back to their individual clients. And if we can't deliver that to the customer, then frankly, if it does work for them to use one login, then they should.
I mean, actually, it's an interesting question about capturing the value. I mean, in some ways, that's how we think of our whole mission as a company is like most, and we were talking about this before when we were mingling, is like most companies can't put any price at all on their talent or on the value of hiring, but they will all say it's the most important thing they do. So it's like, how do you reconcile those two things? Like, well, you guys think this is the most important thing in the world, but how do you, like, where's the gas pedal? If you want better people, how do you apply resources to solving that problem is something that that's our mission in life, is to give them a good answer to that question. But it's not a feature or a button that we have today. It's like a multi-year, like decade-long mission for us, because the connection between like the actions that you take and these, like I talked about interviewing before, there's about a million decisions everybody makes in hiring, and every single one of those has tremendous impact on the output. But like, can you point to any one of them and say, oh, if I do that one differently, I'll have 6 fewer missed hires in the coming year, and each missed hire costs $50K according to this study, and so that's $300,000. Like pretty routine stuff. But drawing those connections and making that really tangible is a long-term project for us, but one that I believe deeply in, because I think our whole category is incredibly underpriced.
I remember talking to you a while back, a couple years ago, and the state of the market for applicant tracking systems was kind of this commodity thing, and it was like, oh, I got the recruiting team, I'll just give them something to keep track of their candidates, right? And I remember you talking about, if you asked a CEO, like, what's the most important thing for your company to succeed? And it'd be like getting the right people, right? Like the disconnect between the tools that they were using to enable the system and what the way that they were thinking about it. And I always thought that was really interesting, how you were kind of connecting those things and really making that clear.
Cool. Do you think it's the role of a enterprise company to become a talking point for recruiting and for sort of employee satisfaction, where you guys become like a weapon for one of your customers to say like, oh, I'd rather work at XYZ Corp because they have Slack and Trello, and that's going to be way more fun than Campfire and Chatter or something, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think absolutely, and this is sort of going back to my life before Slack. I worked at a strategy and consulting firm that was focused on organizational design. We were working with sort of large legacy organizations, and you could see the switch in using tools like Greenhouse and Abacus and Trello and Slack and Google Docs. And there's a huge switch between the types of employees that are being hired into these businesses and sort of the sort of executive level people who have been there for years and years and years. There's still resistance on that sort of executive level. I think for those businesses to be relevant in the future, tools like this have to be part of the equation. And I think as sort of a recruiting tool, yeah, like no one graduating school today is going to go and be psyched about, using some legacy system when they've grown up with these collaborative tools. So I think so.
Yeah, I would even say that beyond the tools itself, which I do think certainly say something about the company, I think it's even deeper than that. And so, when we're on conversations with a prospect, whether they choose Abacus or not, I do try to help them understand that the policies that you establish in your organizations, whether it's the expense policy or otherwise, the policies that you're establishing very much set the tone in your organization. I remember we had a great conversation with one of the co-founders of Stripe, Patrick Collison, and he came to us and he was like, hey, can we make it where every single person in the organization can see every other person's expenses? And that way, we don't need to have an approval process at all because the entire organization, there will be a public shaming. And, like that level of transparency and openness is completely counter to the way that most kind of finance organizations would think about.
If Forbes editorial saw what the ad sales guys were expensing, there would be a riot. So
Exactly.
never happened for us.
Yeah. And so, to a lesser extent, the place that you can really influence that a lot of companies, I think, are not thinking about the culture within the organization is in their policies, in the kind of in the tools that they're using and how heavy they are or how lightweight they are or how how much control there is over it versus just trust.
Well, one thing I'd love, hopefully we have some people building stuff here in the audience, and they're all thinking about this too. How specific do you guys think about your sort of typical customer when you're doing an update or when you're building something or looking for an interesting company for Slack? In terms of, is this a tech-savvy young person? Is this a 40-year-old, 20-year veteran? Does it have to work equally for both? Or can you kind of build for the future and hope that people meet you there? I'm curious how you kind of juggle that question, because we do see a spread in companies where VPs are often, longtime veterans who are trying to keep up. And then, if I'm using Slack for a friend group, I sure as heck expect it at my office.
I mean, being in the horizontal category, it's really important for us that the sort of hurdle to understand what Trello is as low as possible, right? There's not a lot of language that you have to learn, and the concepts are kind of real world. If you put sticky notes on a wall, like, you get it, right? And that's sort of our mission, is that you can get in and totally understand it, and you get this metaphor because it's very visual. I think it's really core to our product. As you get more towards the more vertical solutions like Greenhouse or Abacus, like your app, the value that your app is delivering is a lot more around the structure that it provides people. As a Trello, it's more about we adopt to the structure that people want to create and sort of the way that they're already working. But if you go into a more vertical solution, really what you want to do is, okay, I give you a bunch of data, and then you're going to tell me all these amazing things about what I do. But then there's a little bit more of a learning curve, and that would be an interesting thing, is like, how do you deal with that learning curve and the new user experience and things?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, that's a big driver of how we think about product. And if you think about what we set out to do, it's inherently about behavior change. Our first version of the business plan, before we had anything but me and my co-founder in a PowerPoint, there's like the hardest thing about our business is driving behavior change at scale across millions of organizations. And the thing that we've tried to do is say, well, if you're too much just trying to like capture every last use case that they have today and be super reactive to they want this checkbox and they want that configurable, then you're not actually moving the ball forward. You're just reacting to the needs that they express about their old solution, today. On the other hand, if you just are about pie in the sky, then you're not going to get any customers, right? And so you have to have this like zone where it's useful today and they can solve their problems and like the security concerns are handled and these kind of things, but also there's like a bit of kind of gravity towards the right way forward, and you're kind of always moving the state of the art a little bit towards where the customers want to go as opposed to where they were.
I read I'm blanking on the guy's name. Hope maybe someone's read it and could bail us out after, but I read a Medium post a few days ago by a founder who had just shut down his startup. And he was very honest. He said the difficulty was the value that his enterprise software was providing only really worked at scale. But when he was bringing it to customers, they were never really getting to that scale. And they would say, oh, if you just add this one more feature, we'll get there. But for everyone, it was a different feature. And there was no real common thread where they had a path to build that kind of magic feature that would make everyone get to scale. So you had all these people who are sort of half interested, but they were signing up, and the guy wasn't ever actually seeing that kind of magic inflection point that made him feel like he should keep going.
When we first launched Trello, like a lot of the people that knew about our company and knew about us and were developers or product people, and we weren't although Trello can be used by product people and developers, that wasn't the tool that we were building. And so a lot of the early feedback that we got was driven by that and other, like basically project management systems or bug tracking systems that they had seen and the features that they wanted in Trello that solved that problem in these other systems. And I would just, tell everyone, I was like, what you really need to do is figure out what their pain is and like really drill back. Don't listen to the feature. Behind the feature is this pain that they're having, and listen to that pain. And then when you go to talk to somebody else, you'll hear the same story, and then that'll allow you to come up with something that they haven't seen before that solves the problem for both of those people that are not both developers. It's not going to be Gantt charts and card dependencies and, like these concepts that, like, yes, if you're a project management person, like that's the way that you think, but Trello was trying to do something much different and be approachable to many more people. And so that was really a trick early on to try to like understand how to solve their problem, but not with the feature requests that they asked for.
Yeah, I think that's, well, firstly, that's exactly right. If we were to listen to each prospect that kind of said, well, if you build this one more feature, then like, yeah, we'll definitely use Abacus. Then you end up in this like chase for feature parity. And frankly, in our space, the 800-pound gorilla is Concur, and so literally Concur is just, imagine like a giant database that you can make do anything, right? And so for us to chase them from a feature by feature perspective is just not only a losing proposition, but frankly, that's why it sucks, right? That's why it doesn't work. And so, the advice that I usually give to early stage startups especially is, if you hear about these like feature requests and things like that, then you need to be not only thinking about the pain point, but almost heading in the opposite direction and thinking about, like for us, for example, everyone in the world understands that they hate expense reports. And so what does a world without expense reports look like? And how do we build that? And so it's almost like if they're heading in this direction, rather than chasing them from a feature by feature perspective, then basically head in the exact opposite direction, because then that's how you're increasing your differentiation anyway.
So I'd love to talk about data for a bit. One thing that I think startups are sometimes told or they want to do is they get this idea that, oh, we're also a data play. Not only are we helping our customers with that problem that hopefully they can articulate, but we're also collecting all this aggregate data from all these customers, and if we white label it and we package it together, someday that could be extremely valuable in this way that our VCs are excited about and we don't really get yet. And sometimes that feels like more intuitive than others. Sometimes it, I think, frankly, scares people. So I wrote about a startup called ZenReach. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. And basically what it does is it offers businesses a way to offer free Wi-Fi in exchange for your email sign-up. So if you're a store, you say, oh yeah, log on, we have free Wi-Fi, and even better, here's a 10% discount, and all you got to do is sign up by email. And they're building a giant email list for all their customers. Some people are freaked out because they're worried that if your phone has Wi-Fi turned on, you could never sign up, and they still know you're there. So they have to choose to not collect that data. And I think the fact that Peter Thiel is their board member probably doesn't help. So I'm curious for you guys, how do you decide how much data is the right amount of data to collect? Has there been a point where you guys deliberately didn't collect something from customers, and what would you advise kind of on that dance there?
So of course, we have incredibly sensitive data in our database. We have where people are spending money on staffing agencies and job ads. We have who interviewed each candidate and on what dimension and what they thought of that candidate and who offered who what jobs and how many rounds of negotiation it took until they got an offer for millions of interviews. It's like really real stuff. And the first thing is that data itself is super proprietary to that organization, and it's really, really important that our customers trust us that like if they put that data in as a side effect of doing their work, that data is theirs alone and no one else is going to be able to see it. And we also make the promise that part of what we do as a platform is use the data together in aggregate to make everyone smarter. So, for example, wouldn't it be really nice to know when you're designing out your interview process that if you add more than about 6 or 7 steps to your interview, you're just going to add extra time and extra delay, and you're going to turn away good candidates. You're not actually making smarter decisions. Well, we could help you make that decision based on the aggregate results of millions of interview processes. But it's done in an aggregated and anonymized way. And then I think the other thing I reacted to in your comment was this idea that like you're gonna like box up all the data and ship it off to someone to use. Like that's not really how we think about it. Although, I mean, I have heard other people say that.
Well, take SurveyMonkey, for example. There are a bunch of businesses that they would say, okay, your buy-in is to offer your data white labeled. They won't know who it is. But let's say if we can get every airline, for example, then yes, if you're an airline and your customer service is noticeably worse than the aggregate, you should know that. And you get that information for free in exchange for paying to play with your own data. So it's sort of a data swap.
Yeah, I think that kind of thing where it's like more part of the product experience, where if you're a customer of ours, you can see benchmarks of, hey, when our candidates interview at my company, how do they rate the process, right? We send out an automated candidate survey from Greenhouse, and candidates can say how they think about your process. In exchange for you doing that, you get the benchmark data from other companies about how they felt interviewing at your company. So that's a trade that like most organizations, as long as it's anonymized, feel very comfortable making. We've had some large customers who have expressed concern that like, oh, is my data going to swamp, be overrepresented in there and people can infer what we're doing. But with like thousands of customers, that problem really kind of goes away. And so we're not selling to like one American Airlines and there's 5 others. There's like many, many companies.
Well, and we can pass to Omar, but people, you'd be amazed how paranoid, or maybe not amazed how paranoid people can get. I just read about Amazon Web Services, big feature on their growth and Google and Microsoft's challenge. Retailers like Walmart and some of these other guys are terrified of ever putting anything on Amazon, not because they think Amazon will look at their data, but literally to the point of, oh, we know that Walmart mainly uses this data region and it is close to Cyber Monday, and that data region is spiking more than others, and can we somehow backdoor extrapolate from just a server spike that is probably disproportionately Walmart, and probably Walmart's traffic is up. Now, why would Amazon do that? I don't know. But people are really kind of, I think, very rightly concerned about their own competitive advantage on that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think it's, and certainly there's many cases like this. I mean, it's not like we haven't been approached in the past by hedge funds where they're like, well, you guys have all this corporate spend data, like, can you basically sell that to us? But I think for any company that has, if any company intends to kind of the primary value of their data is related to that, then you should just be transparent, give this service over here for free, and say, this is what I'm going to do with this data. But I think for the most part, I mean, I know for at least most of us and most people who are kind of out there building these startups, the value of this data for us to be able to help a company decide what lever to pull is significantly more valuable than the kind of data play that a lot of startups just kind of put on their slide for VC fundraising if it's going to help with that. And I think to the extent that you really have this 10-year, 20-year, 50-year vision and this mission that you're going after, I think it really tends to kind of fall into that latter bucket.
I just predict the future. You know how WhatsApp, it's got in Facebook Messenger, there's a lot of end-to-end encryption. So actually the servers for WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger, they just have gobbledygook data. It's all encrypted. You can't, even if the FBI came and tried to take it, they couldn't read it. I feel inevitably in the SaaS world, you're going to end up with some turnkey solution for that kind of thing. So it's really easy to build a product like that. And actually the end user just because I would love that. I don't need to look at people's data. I don't care about we specifically don't want to look at the user content and never do and have all these procedures around it. But it would be really nice if when you're building a SaaS app, if it was push this button and you get client keys and it's just all encrypted. And I think eventually you'll get there. I think that I've seen a couple startups playing with that already. And as that gets a little bit more mature, that's the world you'll be in, and you won't have to worry about this anymore.
And then 5 years later, we'll find out there was a government backdoor.
Yeah, well, unless that's the problem. Unless they come and they force you by law to not do that.
How does Slack think about user privacy and companies that are maybe using Slack's APIs?
Yeah, so I mean, we're, again, thinking about us as sort of the hub for where work gets done in your business. And as we move further up into, the enterprise, literally sort of the pulse of your company is happening in Slack. And so thinking about Slack as, searchable and documents stored in Slack, we take it incredibly, incredibly seriously. So obviously all of the data per company is proprietary to that company. We don't, we have processes in place. We don't look at the data. We don't sell the data, and never will. And we don't anonymize any of the data. Having said that, I think like there is a use case, internal company, right, using the data that a company is generating to figure out how to run the company more, pleasantly, productively, and seamlessly. So I think like that's the only place that we would play or help those businesses. But it's a huge bullseye on our back.
So I'm going to open it up to questions, and while people think if they have a good question, I just briefly follow up to that is I'm curious how much you guys worry about hacking and how much you think about what would happen if someone came after your data, because obviously we're seeing a lot of high-profile attacks right now, both on individuals and also on things like the entire Democratic Party.
We're thinking about it a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. We have a big investment in infrastructure and security. There's basically not a minute of a day that goes by that we're not being attacked. So we have a big investment. We have third-party security audits, white label and white box and black box. And we have, means like you can imagine all the data I mentioned earlier. We have a huge investment in trying to keep that data private.
As you get up in the enterprise sales process, like there's like expectations, right? And as soon as that sales process starts, it's like, okay, security review, give me what's your pen test? Like there's basically like a playbook that if you want to play in that enterprise space, you have to be able to have the people and the processes and everything that's happening to be able to meet that. And
is that a good benchmark, or should?
No, that's like bare minimum.
Okay.
Yeah, that's like the
anticipate
floor.
That. You don't want to be waiting.
That's
until
right.
you're asked.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's the floor, and you can't even get in the enterprise sale door without having that. But you can't stop there because of what they're saying. I mean, you just imagine the sorts of data that's in these systems, and we're talking about that. It's really every day you have to be working to protect it.
Yeah, I mean, for I do believe as well that it's kind of a bare minimum, but I also do have a bit of empathy towards like super early stage startups where they can't afford the $100,000 audit that would be required to win this enterprise customer. And so I think there is a way where even if you do believe you have all of the kind of security procedures and things like that in place and everything like that, then there is a balance. And I think with certain kind of early customers, you can kind of have that conversation, and you can basically have scheduled, at this point, like we're going to plan to do this, and at that point we're going to plan to do that. And as you can imagine with Abacus, like we take this super seriously because we actually move people's money, and we've taken it to the point where in building our own payment processor, we've kind of like completely separated the infrastructure out so that it's not even accessible to the internet. But there's definitely, I think, this balance as you're kind of growing as a startup, where you need to start looking at it in different phases. And I think there is a period where the early stage compared to the later stage need to be viewed like slightly differently. But yes.
Questions for these smart leaders?
So you said you're trying to use legacy functions. What is the fact that
Yeah, I mean, we're just starting that right now. So enterprise sales team is being ramped up. There's a team in New York that is engineering focused for the time being. We'll be engineering and sales focused. We're obviously hiring sort of enterprise sales representatives and customer enablement and sales enablement people on the West Coast as well. We've already gotten to that point. I think something like 77 of the Fortune 100 are using us in some respect. It's just getting to that last little cohort. It's getting into the regulated industries that is going to be really, really interesting, and sort of just churning that crank. But it's well underway.
Come on, there's got to be more questions now. All right, there we go.
In 5 years' time, what will be most different about where we work?
That's a great question. I would tend to say the transparency within organizations, and this is already happening. And I think Omar mentioned this earlier, but focusing really on mission and purpose of business, which it's fine to make a lot of money, but that can't be the sole reason you're in existence. And I think if you are, you're sort of in trouble. So I think mission and purpose being super solidified, and then transparency across organization.
I mean, obviously, there's a lot of ways to answer that question.
I won't have a job.
You'll be a bot. What are you talking about?
I'll be
Alex
at
bot.
Facebook
Alex.ai.
in 5 years, exactly.
Yeah. There's I mean, the thing that jumped out at me when I heard the question was, I think there's a big move from like fixed organizational structures to much more fluid organizational structures. And so the notion of like teams emerging within the organization and task forces coming together and doing projects and then kind of disbanding, that's already happening, and there's lots of data to support that. And so I think the notion that you've got like a big brain at the top of the organization, then a big like kind of command and control hierarchy where information has to percolate its way up, and then you make a decision and you make your annual budget, and then it percolates its way down, and all the little foot soldiers do their work. Not the way it's going to happen anymore.
Two things. So I think like if you fast forward 5 years, well, if you rewind 5 years, I think it was pretty odd to have a company that was all remote or mostly remote. I think that's a much more common thing now. Like 60% of the people that work at Trello work remotely, and has a lot to do with the tools, like these 4 products. I mean, they've just gotten a lot better, and the video conferencing has gotten a lot better, and just it becomes more accepted. And maybe it's not 100% remote like Buffer, or but now I can name a couple of companies. It's like Basecamp, Buffer, WordPress. Like you start to get this list, and yeah, they're more in the startup tech sphere, but I think like the flexibility of work is becoming a lot easier, because also measuring productivity is getting better with software and sort of doing these insights into what people are doing and what they're creating. So I think that's pretty interesting. I also think that we went through this evolution of you'd have apps that were for your desktop, and so there's a certain way, the keyboard and the mouse, that you interact, and you switch over to mobile and tablets, and like the interface changes. And I think a lot about that, like with Abacus actually, because Expensify was like they just took like the same model and like put a little website on it. It was still, there's an expense report, and it's like you have to add your expense item and then add your expense attachment, and like it's just very much like, okay, so you took the same model and you just brought it to today. And then Abacus was like, yeah, people that just have their phone, take a picture of the receipt, done. Like it just changed the way that you interact with the application, and you still got the same thing accomplished, which was I need to track my expenses. And I think with all the Amazon Echo and the natural language processing that's happening, that's really changing the way that people are going to act with their apps. Like there was somebody that built on top of the Trello API, he built this thing called a Butler Bot. And if you make a list on your board and you invite Butler Bot to your board, you can just add cards to the list. And the cards can just say, every Thursday, create a card in the first column that tells me to go running. And that's all you write on the card, and then ButlerBot does it. So like that's the interface to his app, is just to talk to it, right, in text. And I mean, he's not speaking, but I think that there's a lot of cool things that are going to change when you get away from field value and sliders and form elements, and it just becomes a much richer experience in the way that we use software.
Yeah, You know, it's funny because if you think about the next 5 years, there's a lot of talk and there's a lot of written about, you know, artificial intelligence and things like that, and it becomes very cliche at some point. But I do believe that there is this role for, you know, very domain-specific types of machine learning, where for very specific spaces and very specific types of use cases, there is actually this huge opportunity to take a lot of the tasks that were being done manually and automate those, whether this results in, you know, rather than having to go through every single item, you're basically surfaced the 10 or 20% of items that you need to focus on, whether that's, you know, smarter notifications alerting you of something to exactly the moment that you need to be alerted to take a decision on that. And frankly, I think for, you know, as we were discussing before, as a lot of people are using more and more services, and, you know, even within Slack, like as people have more and more bots within Slack, and, you know, this is actually going to be required in order to even survive and like swim through that current, you know, so that we're not drowning in this like sea of information notifications. And so I believe strongly that over the next 5 years, that's going to be one of the big drivers behind it.
I mean, this event, probably less than 5 years from now, there is no way that you will come to an event like this in a couple of years, and from the attendee list, software can just very easily and predictably tell you the top 5 people you should try to find and meet at this event. It's really, I mean, we're pretty much already there. Double Dutch can kind of build that for companies that use their app creation software. But I mean, we're close to like that being, you know, accessible, and then even flagging those people for me, so that, you know, it's not like, you know, that you're one of the 5 people that I need to meet, but I can very politely look for you in the crowd, you know? Otherwise, that'd be pretty messed up, but yeah.
So I have kind of a random question. So I work with the government. I work with the UK government, but this is actually a very general government question that hasn't entered the picture at all, and I think most enterprises or enterprise tech companies should have it on their radar. More generally, among master views on the comfort or Brexit or any time. It's more just about how you guys are thinking about the regulatory environment, and if it comes into play at all. If it doesn't, then it's radio silence, that's fine. But I would be interested from like a disruptive, innovative standpoint, something that's on your radar for, you know, who you engage with in the government, the U.S. government, and that. That's my general question.
Yeah, for us, it's actually a really important topic, specifically in relation to the Federal Reserve in terms of the automated clearinghouse, all of that operates. And, you know, I think the big thing for us is the fact that, you know, there are initiatives out there that are coming about to help increase the speed of payments in this country. As many of you may have noticed, you know, you think when you transfer money somewhere, like it's there, but actually it's, you know, it's running through a wheel with some monkeys running on it before it can actually get to the place it needs to go. And in Europe, if you look in Australia, if you look in like any of these other emerging, well, there and other emerging countries, you know, a lot of that technology is already there. And I think in the US, like that is now coming. And so that's kind of our interaction with government, and I'm sure others have other views, but.
The UK Cabinet Office uses Trello, so it's kind of like we've been through this, but with a lot of entities in Europe, obviously Safe Harbor was a big concern, and that disappeared, right? Yeah, that's gone. So now it's replaced by Privacy Shield, which so data privacy is comes into every conversation that we talk to when we're talking to European customers. So it's clearly something that we have to navigate and comply with. And it's I think it's a little bit frustrating because it feels like the people that are creating these regulations don't really get the pain that they're causing the actual what's that? Okay. But it's just it's it's like there's people over here like trying to figure out the right thing to do, and then the actual people that are trying to get stuff done, then they're not really talking. But they solved. They came up with Safe Harbor 2.0, I guess, and but it is something we think about all the time.
I mean, 2 points. One, to Michael's point, like there's definitely a difference between the European kind of concept and the American concepts of like privacy and consumer protection, and that shows up a lot in our product where we'll have like in Germany it's particularly rigorous, and so there's a lot of quite a high barrier to maintaining personal information as a company in Germany, and so we have like features in our product that if you're a recruiter you hate, because it requires you as an organization to delete personal data and not keep it on file unless you've got an explicit permission, which of course is exactly what recruiters want to do, is keep you on file and hit you up every few months and see if you want to change jobs. So we have to build in specific features for local markets that generally companies outside that market would not want to satisfy the regulators. The other thing, like the analogy that's happening here in the US, which I think is really interesting, is around diversity. So diversity and inclusion, particularly in the tech industry, is like a really hot topic these days. We have a lot of very forward-thinking customers like Slack, whose founder blogs regularly about issues of diversity. And yet there's a legal regime in the US which makes it really, really difficult to collect and analyze that information. So God forbid, if you have detailed information about racial, ethnicity, gender, veteran status, about your candidate flow and about who gets hired and about the contents of interviews, and somebody sues you, it's a discovery roadmap to winning. And so companies are very scared of having too much data, and the regulatory environment and the legal environment around is not really helping companies do that. So some of our customers like Slack, we'll get on, or Pinterest or others, like we'll get on the phone with their lawyers and they'll say, we want you to give us this and that fields and data and reports so that we can improve on our efforts. Of course, we're dying to support them on that, but we're like, oh no, I need to hear your lawyer tell us that it's okay for us to let you collect that data because our lawyers are telling us that it's not, right? And so that's like a really interesting kind of new emerging area of law and software for that we're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, I would say with the hiring piece, for Slack specifically, we've gone almost, on the engineering side, we've gone totally to a blind process, right? So like oftentimes we don't even know who's applying, and getting that data is fairly challenging. So on the security side, what I'll say is that, again, it's super top of mind for us. We have some governmental agencies using the product. As we roll out the enterprise product, security, across the board is sort of the number one, I would say, feature, or one of the number one features that has been requested and sort of mandated by a lot of these bigger agencies.
Cool. I think we're out of time, guys, so sorry about that. You can try to swarm them afterwards, but thank you so much for all the candid answers, guys.